My name is Marcus Reynolds, and I never believed in monsters until that summer of 1977. Looking back now, I wish I had listened to all those warnings, those little signs that something wasn't right in Devil's Hollow. But when you're running from your own demons, sometimes you miss the real ones right in front of you. It all started when my 8-year-old daughter Lucy and I hit the road in our old Winnebago Chieftain. The RV wasn't much, but it was all we had left after Sarah, my wife, passed away 3 months ago. Cancer's cruel like that. He takes everything, leaving you with nothing but memories and a broken heart. Lucy hadn't spoken much since the funeral, spending most of her time drawing in that blue notebook of hers. "Look, Daddy," she said that afternoon, holding up her latest drawing. It was different from her usual butterflies and rainbows. This time she had drawn something that made my skin crawl. A huge wolf-like creature standing on 2 legs. I saw him in my dreams. I forced a smile, patting her head. "That's quite an imagination you've got there, sweetie." But something about that drawing felt wrong. Really wrong. We were somewhere in Kentucky, heading towards the Mammoth Cave region. The summer heat was brutal, and our old RV's air conditioning was fighting a losing battle. The sun was setting when our engine started making those sounds, you know, the kind that means trouble and empty wallets. Just a little further, I promised Lucy, but the Winnebago had other plans. With a final wheeze and a cloud of smoke, it died right there on that lonely mountain road. The sign ahead read Devil's Hollow 2 miles. Funny how sometimes the scariest names turn out to be warnings we should have heeded. That's when we heard it. A howl that didn't sound like any wolf or dog I'd ever heard. It was deeper, almost human-like. Lucy grabbed my hand, her small fingers ice cold despite the summer heat. "They're coming, Daddy," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the darkening woods. "The dogmen are coming." I laughed it off then. After all, monsters aren't real, right? That's what I kept telling myself as we sat in our broken-down RV waiting for help. But as the night grew darker and those howls got closer, I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, my daughter knew something I didn't. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of our nightmare in Devil's Hollow. The headlights of a police cruiser finally broke through the darkness around 9 p.m. Sheriff Robert Miller stepped out, his flashlight beam cutting through the night. He was a big man with a thick mustache, but something about his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Folks don't usually break down on this stretch of road," he said, walking up to our RV, "especially not after sunset." He kept looking at Lucy in a way that made me uncomfortable, like he knew something about her that I didn't. "Just need a tow into town," I explained, keeping Lucy close. "We'll get it fixed and be on our way." The sheriff chuckled, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Town's mechanic, old Joe, won't be available until morning, but there's a motel just past the town square. I can give you folks a ride." That's when Lucy tugged at my sleeve. "Daddy, I want to stay in the RV," she whispered. Her face was pale and she was clutching her notebook so tight her knuckles were white. "It's not safe out here, sweetheart," I said, though something in my gut agreed with her. "We'll be better off in town." As we rode in the sheriff's car, I noticed how empty Devil's Hollow was. The few streetlights showed closed shops with boards on their windows. The only open place was a small diner where a few people sat very still, watching us pass by. "Not much of a night town," Sheriff Miller said, noticing my look. "Folks here prefer to stay inside after dark, especially when the moon's getting full." We pulled up to the Hollow Inn Motel where an old lady was waiting on the porch. She introduced herself as Martha Whitaker, and something about her reminded me of my grandmother, until I saw the worry in her eyes when she looked at Lucy. "Room 13 is ready," Martha said, then grabbed my arm as Lucy walked ahead. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Mr. Reynolds, you seem like a good father, so listen carefully. Don't let your daughter out of your sight. Not for a second, and whatever you hear tonight, keep your doors locked." "What do you mean, whatever we hear?" Martha glanced at Sheriff Miller, who was watching us from his car. "This town, it has rules, and the most important one is stay inside after dark." Just then another howl echoed through the town, closer this time. Lucy stopped at the motel door, her whole body tense. "They're hungry tonight," she said in a voice that didn't sound like hers at all. I hurried her inside, trying to ignore the way the sheriff's car lingered in the parking lot, or how Martha crossed herself before hurrying away. As I locked our door, I could have sworn I saw something large move in the shadows across the street. Something that walked on two legs but wasn't exactly human. That night, none of us got much sleep. Lucy kept drawing in her notebook. More wolfmen, each picture more detailed than the last. And outside our window, things moved in the darkness, their shadows dancing under the streetlights like a nightmare come to life. I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation for everything. But deep down, I knew we'd stumbled into something much bigger and much more dangerous than a simple broken-down RV in a strange town. The next morning, I woke up to find Lucy sitting by the window, her notebook filled with new drawings. But these weren't just wolfmen anymore. She had drawn the entire town, and in the shadows of every building were pairs of glowing eyes. "Daddy," she said without looking at me. "Martha knows, she's like me." Before I could ask what she meant, someone knocked on our door. It was Martha, carrying a tray with breakfast and a worried look on her face. She hurried inside, closing the door quickly behind her. "The town's not safe today," she said, setting down the tray. "Last night, the Johnsons' dog disappeared, and Mrs. Parker's cats, all three of them. It always starts with the pets." I sat down on the bed, trying to make sense of it all. "Martha, what's really going on here?" She looked at Lucy, who was still drawing. "Your daughter knows. She can feel them, can't she? Just like I could when I was young." Lucy nodded, showing Martha her drawings. The old woman's hands shook as she looked through them. "Mr. Reynolds," Martha's voice got very quiet, "this town has a secret. A curse that's as old as these mountains. Every full moon, which is just 3 days away, things change." A loud bang outside made us all jump. Through the window, we saw Sheriff Miller talking to a group of men. They all looked nervous, keeping to the shadows despite the morning sun. "They're getting ready," Lucy whispered. "The pack is hungry." "Pack?" I asked, but deep down, I already knew. Martha took a deep breath. "They're called the Dogmen. They're not exactly werewolves, but something older. They've been here since before the town, living in the caves. The townspeople, most of them, they made a deal long ago. They helped the pack, and the pack lets them live." "This is crazy," I said, standing up. "We need to leave." "You can't," Martha said. "Your RV's engine, it wasn't an accident, it broke down. They won't let you leave, not now. They've seen Lucy. They know what she is. A seer, someone who can communicate with them. The pack hasn't had a seer in 50 years, not since I was young." Lucy walked over and took my hand. Her small fingers were ice cold again. "The Alpha spoke to me in my dreams, Daddy. He wants me to join them." Just then we heard another howl, in broad daylight this time. Martha rushed to the window and quickly pulled the curtains shut. "Listen carefully," she said. "We have 3 days until the full moon. If we're going to get you and Lucy out of here, we need to act fast. But first, you need to know the whole story, about the caves, the curse, and why they really want your daughter." I pulled Lucy close, feeling more scared than I'd ever been in my life. Outside, something scratched at our door, and Sheriff Miller's voice called out, "Just checking if everything's all right in there, folks." Martha put her finger to her lips, signaling us to be quiet. In the silence, we could hear heavy breathing on the other side of the door, breathing that didn't sound human at all. We waited until Sheriff Miller's footsteps faded away. Martha pulled out an old leather book from her bag, her hands trembling as she opened it. "50 years ago, I was just like Lucy," Martha began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I could see them, talk to them. The pack wanted me too, but my grandmother, she knew how to protect me. She taught me everything, and now I'm going to help you." Lucy crawled into my lap, clutching her notebook. Outside, dark clouds were gathering, making the morning look like evening. "The pack lives in the deepest parts of Mammoth Cave. Martha continued. They only come out at night, except during the full moon. That's when they're strongest. That's when they can change anyone they want into one of them. But why Lucy? I asked, holding my daughter tighter. Because she's special. A seer can control them, lead them. The current alpha is dying. He needs someone to take his place. He's been waiting for another seer. Suddenly, Lucy sat up straight. They're coming, she whispered. Through the caves. I can feel them moving. Martha quickly pulled out a map of the town. There's only one way out now. Through the old mining tunnel. It connects to a back road that leads to the highway. But we have to go tonight, before they get stronger. A loud crash from outside made us all freeze. Through a gap in the curtains, I saw people running into their houses. The sky had turned an odd purple color, and the wind was picking up. They're hunting early today, Martha said, stuffing the map in my jacket pocket. Get your things, we'll go through the back door when it gets dark. The pack will be busy with their ritual in the caves. What ritual? I asked. But Lucy answered instead. They're calling the moon, she said in that strange voice again. They're hungry for new pack members. She opened her notebook to a new drawing. It showed the sheriff transforming into something horrible. Martha nodded grimly. Sheriff Miller is their human leader. He helps them choose who to turn. Who to? She stopped, looking away. Who to eat, Lucy finished, making my blood run cold. We spent the rest of the day in that small motel room jumping at every sound. Martha taught us how to make protection charms with things from her bag. Salt, herbs, and silver chains. Lucy seemed to know exactly what to do, like she'd done it before. As the sun started to set, we heard it and howls from every direction, getting closer. Martha looked out the window one last time. It's time, she said, pulling out an old revolver loaded with silver bullets. Stay close, stay quiet. And whatever happens, she looked straight at Lucy. Don't answer when they call you, no matter what voice they use. Lucy nodded, taking both our hands. As we slipped out the back door into the growing darkness, I heard something that made my heart stop. Sarah's voice, my dead wife's voice, calling Lucy's name from the shadows. Lucy squeezed my hand harder, tears in her eyes, but kept walking. The hunt for us had begun. We crept through the dark alleys behind the motel, staying close to the walls. Every shadow seemed to move, and the air smelled like wet dogs and something worse. Martha led the way, her silver-loaded gun ready. The mine entrance is behind the old church, she whispered. Just 3 blocks to go. That's when we heard it. The sound of claws scraping on concrete, coming from both directions. We pressed ourselves against a wall, hardly daring to breathe. A massive shape moved past the alley entrance, walking on 2 legs, but definitely not human. Its head was like a wolf's, but bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen. With eyes that glowed yellow in the darkness, Lucy buried her face in my jacket, shaking. But then she went very still. The Alpha, she whispered. He's calling the pack. They're going to surround us. Martha pulled us into an old garage, just as more shapes appeared on the street. Through a dirty window, we watched in horror as people we'd seen in the diner began to change. Their bodies twisted and grew, clothes ripping as fur sprouted from their skin. Their screams turned into howls. The sheriff's leading them, Martha said, pointing to a larger creature with silver-streaked fur. He's making them change early. He knows we're trying to escape. Suddenly, Lucy let out a small gasp. Daddy, look. She pointed to her notebook, which was glowing faintly in the dark. The drawings were moving on the pages, showing us where the pack was. Your power is growing stronger. Martha said, we can use this. The pack can't hide from a seer. Lucy turned the pages, her finger tracing the moving drawings. There's a clear path through the lumberyard. They haven't gone there yet. We slipped out the back of the garage, moving as quietly as we could. The lumberyard was full of tall stacks of wood, creating a maze of shadows. We could hear howls and screams from the town behind us, getting closer. Almost there, Martha encouraged us. The church is just past the she. She never finished. A huge dark shape dropped from the top of a lumber pile, landing right in front of us. It was Sheriff Miller, but not human anymore. His wolf-like face pulled back in what looked like a smile, showing rows of sharp teeth. Now, Martha," he growled. His voice a horrible mix of human and animal. "You know the rules. No one leaves during hunting time, especially not our new seer." More dogmen appeared around us, their eyes glowing in the darkness. They moved closer, herding us away from the church, away from our escape route. Lucy stepped forward, her notebook glowing brighter. "Stop," she commanded, her voice echoing strangely. The dogmen hesitated, whining like confused puppies. But then another howl split the night, deeper and more powerful than the others. The Alpha was coming. "Run," Martha shouted, firing her gun at Sheriff Miller. The silver bullet hit him in the shoulder, making him howl in pain. "The church, go!" We ran, hearing snarls and gunshots behind us. Lucy's notebook lit our way like a lantern, showing us the safe path. But as we reached the church steps, I looked back and saw something that made my heart stop. Martha was surrounded by dogmen, fighting them off with her silver gun. "Go," she screamed again. "I'll hold them back." We ran into the old church, its wooden doors creaking as we slammed them shut. The inside was dark except for the moonlight coming through broken stained glass windows. Lucy's glowing notebook showed us the way to the back. There, I spotted a rusty door behind the altar. But before we could reach it, something massive crashed through the church windows. Glass rained down as the biggest dogman I'd ever seen landed in front of us. The Alpha. He was twice the size of the others with gray fur and eyes that glowed blood red. "Little seer," his voice rumbled like thunder. "Your power calls to us. You belong with the pack." Lucy stepped forward, her notebook blazing bright now. "No," she said firmly. "You hurt people. You're not getting anyone else." The Alpha laughed a horrible sound. "Brave child. Just like Martha was, all those years ago. But she chose wrong, and now she'll die." "Unless what?" I asked, pulling Lucy back. "Join us willingly, little seer, and we'll spare them both. Refuse and watch them die." More dogmen crashed through the windows, including Sheriff Miller, his shoulder still smoking from the silver bullet. They dragged Martha in, hurt but still fighting. "Don't listen to him, Lucy," Martha yelled. "Get to the mines. The silver water in the deep cave. It's their weakness." The Alpha roared, silencing everyone. But Lucy didn't look scared anymore. She opened her notebook to a new page and started drawing faster than I'd ever seen her draw before. "What are you doing, child?" The Alpha growled, suddenly sounding worried. "Finishing the picture," Lucy said calmly. "The one that shows how to break the curse." The notebook's glow got so bright it hurt to look at. The dogmen backed away, whining. On the page, Lucy had drawn the Alpha, but not as he was now. She'd drawn him as he used to be, a man, trapped by an ancient curse, forced to turn others into monsters. "You're not evil," Lucy said to him. "You're just scared. Scared of being alone. But hurting people isn't the answer." The Alpha howled, but it sounded more like a cry of pain. The other dogmen started changing back to human form, unable to hold their wolf shapes against Lucy's power. "The mines," Martha shouted. "Quick, while they're weak." We ran for the back door, but I'll never forget what I saw when I looked back. The Alpha fighting against Lucy's power, tears running down his wolf-like face as his true self was revealed in her drawing. The mine entrance was dark and cold. Our only light came from Lucy's glowing notebook as we ran down the rusty metal stairs. Behind us, angry howls echoed through the tunnel. "The silver water cave is deep down," Martha said, limping but keeping up. "The pack avoids it. It's where the curse started, and it's where it can end." Water dripped from the ceiling, and our footsteps echoed on the metal stairs. Lucy kept drawing as we moved, her pictures showing us which tunnels were safe. "They're changing back," she whispered. "But the Alpha, he's fighting it. He's so angry." A roar shook the whole mine, making dirt fall from above. "Keep moving," Martha urged. "We're almost there." We reached the bottom of the stairs and found ourselves in a huge cave. In the center was a pool of water that seemed to glow with a silver light. Ancient drawings covered the walls, pictures of men turning into wolves, just like Lucy's drawings. "This is where it happened," Martha explained quickly. "Hundreds of years ago, the first Alpha made a deal with Dark Spirit. He wanted power, but the curse trapped him and everyone he turned. Only a seer can break it." "By doing what?" I asked, holding Lucy close. Before Martha could answer, the Alpha burst into the cave, looking more monster than ever. Sheriff Miller and other half-transformed dogmen followed him. "You cannot end this," the Alpha roared. "The pack must survive." Lucy stepped toward the silver pool, her notebook glowing brighter than ever. "You don't need to hurt people to survive," she said. "I can help you be free." The Alpha charged at us, but Lucy didn't move. Instead, she held up her notebook, showing him his own story. Not just what he became, but who he was before. A man who made a terrible choice, who'd been trapped for centuries, forcing others to share his curse so he wouldn't be alone. "It's time to let go," Lucy said softly. "Time to be free." The Alpha stopped, just inches from Lucy. Behind him, the other dogmen were changing completely back to human form, looking confused and scared. Lucy reached out and touched the Alpha's furry face. A single tear fell from his red eye into the silver pool. The water began to glow brighter and brighter. The cave filled with a blinding silver light. The Alpha let out a cry. Not a howl this time, but a human sound, full of pain and relief. As the light touched him, his huge form began to shrink. The fur disappeared, and there stood an old man with tears running down his face. I remember who I was," he said, in a shaky voice. "All these years, all these people I hurt." The silver light spread through the cave, touching all the dogmen. One by one, they changed back. Really back, not just halfway like before. Sheriff Miller fell to his knees, looking at his human hands like he'd never seen them before. "The curse," Martha whispered. "It's breaking." But then Lucy swayed on her feet. I caught her just before she fell. "Daddy," she said weakly. "They're all so sad. So many years of being monsters. They need help." The old man who had been the Alpha knelt beside us. "Child," he said gently, "you freed us from the curse of changing into monsters. But what about our guilt? What about the families we've hurt?" Lucy opened her notebook one last time. The pages glowed with a soft, warm light. Not silver this time, but golden like sunrise. "You can't change the past," she said, "but you can choose to be good now. That's what Mom always told me." As she spoke, the cave walls seemed to shine with their own light. The ancient drawings began to change, showing new stories. Stories of healing, of people helping each other, of monsters becoming human again. "The curse isn't completely gone," Martha explained, looking at the drawings. "But it's changed. Instead of forcing people to become monsters, it'll remind them to be human." Sheriff Miller stood up, looking older and tired. "We've got a lot to make up for," he said, "starting with making this town right again." The golden light faded slowly. Lucy's notebook stopped glowing, but the pictures she'd drawn remained, not just showing what had happened, but what could be. The last drawing showed the town of Devil's Hollow in sunlight, with people and former dogmen living together in peace. As we climbed back up through the mines, the sun was rising. The town looked different in the morning light, or maybe we were seeing it differently now. People were coming out of their houses, blinking in the sunlight like they were waking up from a long nightmare. That morning, Old Joe finally fixed our RV. As he worked, Lucy sat on the steps of Martha's porch, drawing pictures of the town as it was now. Peaceful, normal, with people smiling in the sunshine. "Will they be okay?" Lucy asked Martha, watching the former Alpha now just a tired old man named Thomas helping clean up the broken glass outside the church. "They'll be fine, dear," Martha smiled, patting Lucy's hand. "Sometimes people need a second chance. You gave them that." Sheriff Miller walked up to us, looking different in the daylight. The meanness was gone from his face. "I've called ahead to the next town," he said. "Made sure you folks have a safe place to stay tonight." "Thank you," I said, still finding it strange to talk normally to someone who tried to hunt us down just hours ago. "No thank you," he replied, looking at Lucy. "Both of you. We were lost for so long we forgot how to be human. Your daughter reminded us." As we got ready to leave, the townspeople gathered around. They'd brought food for our trip, and even some new colored pencils for Lucy. Thomas stepped forward last, holding something wrapped in old leather. "For the young seer," he said, handing it to Lucy. It was a small silver charm shaped like a wolf. "To remember that there's good and bad in all of us. It's the choices we make that matter." Lucy hugged him, then Martha, who wiped away tears. "Will we ever see you again?" Lucy asked. "Devil's Hollow will always welcome you," Martha said, "but as friends this time, not hunters." As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The town looked smaller now, almost peaceful. Lucy was already drawing in her notebook, but these pictures were different. Happy scenes of people and wolves living in harmony. "You know, Daddy," she said, looking up with a smile that reminded me so much of her mother, "sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who just need someone to help them not be scared anymore." I reached over and squeezed her hand, thinking how this brave little girl had not only saved a town full of cursed people, but had also helped me find my way back from my own dark place. The road stretched ahead of us, and somewhere behind, a wolf howled, not in hunger or anger this time, but in farewell. Lucy waved out the window one last time, as Devil's Hollow disappeared around the bend, taking its secrets with it. But that's not quite the end of our story. Sometimes, on full moon nights, Lucy still draws in her special notebook, and sometimes, when the wind is just right, we hear friendly howls in the distance, reminding us that not all monsters stay monsters forever. My name is Rick O'Connor, and I never thought I'd return to these dark Maine forests. But here I am, steering my old 1976 GMC RV through roads I swore I'd forgotten. The snow is falling harder than it should for October's sway harder. My knuckles are white on the steering wheel, as memories I've tried to bury for 30 years keep bubbling up. I'm a professional hunter and guide now, but this place holds secrets I've been running from since I was 9. My brother Peter still works here as a forest ranger. We haven't spoken in years, not since that night when everything went wrong. But the phone call I got last week changed everything. "People are disappearing, Rick." Peter's voice had cracked over the static. "Just like back then, we need you here." The RV's headlights barely cut through the thickening snow. Something dark darts between the trees. Probably just a deer, I tell myself. But deep down, I know better. The forests of northern Maine have always held things far worse than deer. An old man is waiting at the ranger station when I pull up. Harold Winters, they said his name was. The only person who survived something terrible in these woods back in 1947. His eyes are wide and fearful when I step out of the RV. "You shouldn't have come back," he whispers, his breath frosting in the unnaturally cold air. It's awake again, and this time it's hungrier than ever. I feel a chill that has nothing to do with the weather, because in these parts, hunger isn't just about being empty. Sometimes it's about being filled with something much, much worse. The snow is falling faster now, and the trees, did they just move closer? I swear they were further apart a minute ago. But that's impossible, right? The ranger station door creaks open, and there's my brother Peter. He looks older than I remember. His dark hair now has streaks of gray. For a moment, neither of us knows what to say. 30 years of silence is a hard thing to break. "The RV looks cozy," he finally says, trying to smile. "You might want to park it closer. This storm's getting worse." He's right. The snow is already piling up around my tires, and the wind is making weird howling sounds through the trees. I've been in plenty of winter storms before, but something about this one feels wrong. That's when Linda Walsh walks in, carrying a stack of old books. She's a local researcher who studies the area's history, Peter explains. Her eyes light up when she sees me. "You're Rick O'Connor, the brother who was there in '95. She asks, setting down her books. "I've been studying the patterns, the disappearances, the storms. They're all connected to something ancient in these woods." Harold, who's been quietly watching from the corner, suddenly speaks up. "Tell him about the markers, Linda. Tell him what you found." Linda pulls out some photos. They show old stone carvings hidden deep in the forest. Weird symbols I've never seen before, but something about them makes my stomach turn. They remind me of that night when I was 9, when Peter and I. A loud bang makes us all jump. Something hit the station's window, probably just a branch blown by the wind. But when we look outside, the tracks in the snow aren't from any animal I've ever seen. They're huge, deep, and they lead right into the darkening forest. Peter grabs his rifle. "We need to get to your RV, Rick. It's safer than the station's, more mobile." "Mobile for what?" I ask, but I already know the answer. "For when the forest starts moving," Harold whispers, "because it will. It always does when they wake up." The wind gets louder, and through it I hear something that sounds like laughter. But not human laughter. Not even close. We grab what we can. Linda's books, Peter's gear, Harold's old maps, and make a run for my RV. As I start the engine, I catch a glimpse of something tall and thin moving between the trees. My hands shake as I turn on the headlights. This isn't just about facing my past anymore. This is about surviving what's coming. And from the look in Harold's eyes, what's coming is worse than anything in my nightmares. The RV's heater is running full blast, but we can still see our breath inside. Linda spreads her books and maps across the small dining table while Harold paces nervously by the window. Peter keeps checking his radio, but all we get is static. "The rescue teams went in yesterday," Peter says, pointing to spots on the map. "3 groups, none came back. Just like the hikers last week." My hands tighten around my coffee mug. "Tell me about the thing you saw, Pete." He looks at me, and for a second I see the scared little kid from 30 years ago. It was tall, maybe 12 feet, skinny as a dead tree, and fast, Rick, so fast. "Wendigo," Harold cuts in, his voice shaking. "That's what the natives called them. I saw one in '47, watched it take my whole team. But this is different. There's more of them now, and they're being controlled." A sudden thump on the RV's roof makes us all freeze. Linda's fingers grip her book so hard her knuckles turn white. We hear slow, dragging footsteps above us. "Nobody move," I whisper. The footsteps stop right above where we're sitting. Snow falls past the windows, but it's moving the wrong way. Sideways instead of down. The forest outside seems darker, even though it's only mid-afternoon. That's when we hear it. A sound like a hungry stomach growling, but much louder, much worse. The windows start to frost over, making strange patterns that look almost like faces. "The trees," Linda gasps, pointing outside. "Look at the trees." I wipe the frost from my window and feel my heart stop. The pine trees around us have moved closer to the RV. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear they were at least 50 feet away just minutes ago. Now they're barely 10 feet from us. Harold starts mumbling something in a language I don't understand. Linda frantically flips through her books. "It's happening again," Peter says quietly. "Just like that night, Rick. Remember? When we found that cave?" I remember. God help me, I remember. But before I can answer, we hear a scream from somewhere in the forest. A human scream that suddenly turns into something else. Something hungry. The radio crackles to life, but instead of voices we hear what sounds like chewing. Wet, horrible chewing. "We need to move," I say, jumping into the driver's seat. But when I try to start the RV, the engine just clicks. The cold has frozen something, or maybe something else is keeping us here. Linda finds a page in one of her books and goes pale. "According to this, they're not just hunting us," she says. "They're changing the forest itself, making it theirs." Another thump on the roof, harder this time. Above us, something starts to laugh. The temperature inside the RV keeps dropping. Peter suddenly grabs his arm, wincing in pain. When he rolls up his sleeve, we all gasp. There's a dark mark spreading under his skin like frost on a window. "It got me," he whispers. "When we found those hikers yesterday, I thought it was just a scratch." Harold stumbles backward, nearly falling. "The hunger infection," he says, his voice trembling. "It starts like that. I've seen it before." I grab Peter's shoulders. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew you'd come running to help," he says with a weak smile. "Just like when we were kids." Another bang on the RV's roof, and this time long skinny fingers start creeping down our windshield. They're gray, like dead wood, and so long they wrap all the way across the glass. Linda is frantically reading from her book. "The mark spreads faster in the cold," she says. "We need to keep him warm and—" She stops, staring at something outside. Through the swirling snow, we see them dark shapes moving between the trees. They're tall, so tall, and they're walking on legs that bend the wrong way. I count 5, no, 7 of them. And behind them, something bigger is moving in the darkness. "The Ancient One," Harold whispers. "It's controlling them all. Just like in 47. Peter's breathing gets heavier. And the mark on his arm spreads a little more. The radio crackles again, and this time we hear words through the static. "Hungry, so hungry." I know that voice. It's Dave, from the rescue team that went missing yesterday. Linda grabs my arm. "Rick, look at the trees. The pines around us are changing. Their bark is turning black and their branches are twisting into shapes that look almost like reaching hands. The snow falling around them is moving in circles now, like a slow-motion whirlpool." Harold suddenly stands straighter, his eyes wide. "I know what we have to do," he says, grabbing his coat. "The sacred grove. It's our only chance." "Harold, no." Linda tries to stop him, but he's already opening the RV door. "I've lived with this guilt for too long," he says. "The grove is half a mile east. Get there before dawn. I'll buy you some time." Before we can stop him, Harold steps out into the snow. We watch through frosted windows as he walks toward the twisted trees, singing something in that strange language. The dark shapes in the forest turn toward him. "Move." Peter groans, fighting to stand up, while they're distracted. "Move." I turn the key again, and this time, thank God, the engine starts. But as I put the RV in gear, we hear Harold's last scream. It echoes through the forest, turning into something that sounds like laughter, or maybe crying. The mark on Peter's arm keeps spreading, and outside, the forest keeps changing. But somewhere in this nightmare, there's a sacred grove that might save us. If we can make it there in time. If we can make it there at all. The RV crawls through the snow, its headlights barely showing the way. Peter's getting worse. His skin is ice cold now, and his eyes have a strange, hungry look. Linda keeps reading from her books, searching for anything that might help. "The sacred grove," she says, her voice shaking. "The natives used it for rituals. It's where they contained the first wendigo hundreds of years ago." A branch scrapes against our roof, making us all jump. Through the windows, we can see the forest is wrong. The trees aren't just moving anymore, they're changing shape. Some look like they have faces in their bark, twisted and hungry. "Rick," Peter whispers, his voice different now, rougher. "Remember that summer, when we found that cave?" I grip the steering wheel tighter. "Don't, Pete. Not now. We have to talk about it. The thing we saw, what we did." Suddenly, something huge steps onto the road in front of us. I slam the brakes, and we all lurch forward. In the headlights stands the tallest, thinnest thing I've ever seen. Its skin is like gray bark, and its arms reach almost to the ground. But its face, there's nothing there except hunger. "The Ancient One," Linda gasps. "The first wendigo." It opens its mouth, a black hole filled with ice, and screams. The sound makes all the windows crack, and Peter falls to his knees, clutching his head. "Drive around it," Linda shouts. "The grove should be just past those rocks." I hit the gas, steering the RV off the road. The Ancient One swipes at us with its long arms, leaving deep scratches in the metal. In the side mirror, I see more shapes emerging from the forest. The lesser wendigos, following their master. Peter starts laughing, but it doesn't sound like him anymore. The dark marks have spread up his neck now. I can hear them, he says. I can hear all of them. So hungry, so cold. Linda grabs an old leather bag from her books. I found this in the Historical Society. It's a ritual pouch. If we can get to the grove in time, the RV's engine starts to sputter. The cold is killing it, or maybe it's something else. Through the cracked windshield, I see a clearing ahead. Old stones stand in a circle, covered in symbols that glow faintly in the darkness. The grove, Linda says. We made it. But as the RV rolls to a stop, we hear Peter's voice, only it's not really his voice anymore. Brothers shouldn't keep secrets, he growls. Should we tell Linda what really happened in that cave? Rick, should we tell her what we did? His eyes are completely black now, and when he smiles, his teeth look sharp. Outside, the Ancient One and its pack are closing in. The trees around the grove are bending inward, like they're trying to trap us. And somewhere in the darkness, Harold's sacrifice is already being forgotten by the hungry forest. Linda's hands shake as she opens the ritual pouch. Inside are old bones, herbs, and a small stone covered in strange markings. The RV's interior feels like a freezer now, and Peter isn't really Peter anymore. The cave, he growls, his voice getting deeper, more inhuman. Tell her, Rick. Tell her how we found that boy in there. Tell her what we did to survive. Tears freeze on my cheeks. We were just kids, Pete. We were lost and scared, and a massive shape slams into the RV, nearly tipping us over. Through the windows, we see the ancient wendigo's face, if you can call it a face. Its empty eyes stare right through us, and its mouth opens wider than any mouth should. The ritual, Linda shouts. We need to get to the center of the grove. It's the only way. Peter suddenly lunges at me, his fingers now long and gray like tree branches. So hungry, brother, so very hungry. I dodge him, but just barely. Pete, fight it. Remember who you are. Linda starts spreading the herbs in a circle on the RV's floor. The ritual needs two things, she says quickly. Blood from someone who's turning, and a sacrifice of love. Outside, the lesser wendigos are circling the RV. The Ancient One reaches down and starts peeling off our roof like it's opening a can. Snow swirls around us, but it's black snow now, like ashes. The cave, Peter moans, fighting against the change. We promised never to tell. The boy, we left him there. No, I say, grabbing his shoulders. We didn't leave him. We were all kids, lost in that storm. We did what we had to do to survive, but we stayed with him. That's what really happened, Pete. That's the truth we couldn't face. Linda throws the herbs into the air, speaking words I don't understand. The stone in her hand starts to glow. Now she screams. The sacrifice. It has to be now. The ancient wendigo reaches into the RV, its long fingers grabbing for us. Peter looks at me, and for a moment, I see my brother again in those black eyes. I'm sorry, he whispers, then everything happens at once. Peter grabs the glowing stone from Linda. The ancient wendigo's hand closes around him. I reach for my brother, but I'm too late. Take care of the forest, Peter says. Then he presses the stone against his chest, and the world turns white. The last thing I hear is the ancient wendigo's scream. But this time, it's not a scream of hunger, it's a scream of fear. When I open my eyes, everything is different. The black snow has stopped, and the first light of dawn is breaking through the trees. But these aren't the same twisted trees from before. They're normal pines, standing straight and tall. Linda helps me up from the RV's floor. The roof is completely gone, torn away by the ancient wendigo, but the creature itself is nowhere to be seen. Neither are its followers. Peter, I whisper, looking around. Where's Peter? Linda points to the center of the grove. There, stuck in the ground like it's been there for centuries, is a new stone marker. It's covered in the same symbols as the others, but these are glowing with a soft blue light. He became the new guardian, Linda says softly. He used the turning against them. The sacrifice had to be willing, and it had to be made with love. I walk to the stone, my legs shaking. When I touch it, it's warm. Not cold like you'd expect in this weather. And somewhere, deep inside my head, I hear a familiar laugh. Not the horrible, hungry laugh from before, but my brother's real laugh like when we were kids. The forest will be safe now, Linda explains, putting her hand on my shoulder. The Ancient One is trapped again, and its followers are gone. But it needs someone to watch over it, to keep the balance. And that's Pete now, I ask, my voice cracking. She nods. He's part of the forest, part of what protects it, and, she pauses. Looking around, I think I'm supposed to stay too, to learn, to help keep the stories and the rituals alive. As if answering her, the symbols on all the stones in the grove start glowing brighter. I stay until sunset, helping Linda set up a small camp near the grove. The RV is destroyed, but somehow my old sleeping bag survived. I give it to her, along with some supplies. "Will you come back?" she asks as I get ready to leave. I look at the stone marker that used to be my brother. A warm breeze, strange for this time of year, rustles through the pines. "Yeah," I say. "Someone needs to check on you two troublemakers." As I walk away from the grove, I hear that laugh again in my head. But this time it's joined by something else, the sound of the forest itself, healthy and alive, watching over by a guardian who finally found his peace. The hunger is gone now, and in its place, something better has grown. Something like hope. 1 year later, I'm driving back to the grove. The forest looks different now, healthier, more alive. The trees seem to nod as I pass, like they remember me. Linda's made a real home here. She's built a small cabin near the sacred stones, filled with books and maps. When I arrive, she's teaching 2 young rangers about the forest's history. The protector keeps us safe, she tells them. But we have to do our part too. No more disappearances, no more hungry things in the dark. At night, we sit by her campfire. The stars shine brighter here than anywhere else I've ever seen. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear Pete laughing. There was another wendigo sighting up north, Linda says, poking the fire. But it didn't come near here. It knew better. I nod, looking at the stone marker that glows softly in the darkness. "How's my brother doing?" Linda smiles. "He's good. The forest is good. Yesterday he led 2 lost hikers back to the trail. They thought they were following a park ranger. Old guy, kind eyes. Said he just appeared out of nowhere and showed them the way." I feel something warm in my chest. That sounds like Pete all right. Still helping people even now. Before I leave the next morning, I walk to the marker. The symbols pulse gently, like a heartbeat. "You did good, little brother," I whisper. "Real good." A warm breeze rustles through the pines and a single leaf lands on my shoulder. It's shaped like a hand giving a thumbs up. I can't help but laugh. The forest has its guardian now. The hungry things stay away. And somewhere in these woods, my brother watches over it all, finally at peace with who he is and what we did all those years ago. Some people say the forest is still haunted. Maybe it is. But not all hauntings are bad. Sometimes they're just reminders that someone is looking out for you. Even if that someone happens to be the wind in the pines, or the shadow between the trees, or a brother who found his true calling in the most unexpected way. I visit every few months now. The forest welcomes me each time, and somewhere in the rustle of leaves and the whisper of branches, I hear my brother's voice. "Welcome home, Rick. The forest has been waiting for you. And you know what? It feels like home now. It really does." My name is Jack Redwood, and I've been a tribal police officer here in the Badlands of South Dakota for over 20 years. But nothing in all those years prepared me for what happened at spring. Nothing at all. I live with my 15-year-old daughter Emily in a small house near the reservation. Since my wife Sarah passed away 5 years ago, it's just been the two of us. Emily is special. She has these dreams sometimes. Dreams that mean something. Just like her grandmother used to have. I never really believed in all that spiritual stuff, even though I'm Lakota. But after what we went through, well, let's just say I believe now. It all started one unusually warm morning in late May. I was making breakfast, just some scrambled eggs and toast, when Emily came running down the stairs, her long black hair all messy from sleep. Her face was pale, and I knew right away something was wrong. "Dad," she said, her hands shaking as she grabbed my arm. I saw it again. The wings, the lightning, it's coming. I was about to tell her it was just a bad dream, like I always did when my phone rang. It was the station. 3 tourists had gone missing near the sacred caves, and their RV was found completely burned out. Not just burned, but somehow melted, like it had been struck by lightning. But there hadn't been any storms. That's when everything changed. That's when our normal life turned into something straight out of the old stories my Uncle George, everyone calls him Thunder White Eagle, used to tell around the fire. I didn't know it then, but Emily and I were about to face something ancient, something powerful, something that had been sleeping in our sacred lands for generations, and it was waking up angry. Let me tell you what happened. Every word of it is true, even the parts you won't want to believe. I grabbed my old leather jacket and keys to our 1972 Winnebago. That's our RV, kind of like a house on wheels. Emily calls it our rolling home. It's not fancy, but it's perfect for our work on the reservation. Emily sat quietly next to me as we drove, playing with her turquoise necklace, the last gift from her mom. The morning sky looked weird, really weird. There were dark clouds hanging low, but they weren't moving like normal clouds. They just stayed there, like a lid on a pot. The radio kept crackling with static, and my phone wouldn't work right. "Dad," Emily whispered, "something feels different today, like the air before a really big storm, but worse." I knew what she meant. The hair on my arms was standing up, and there was this feeling, like when you stand too close to a TV screen and feel that electric buzz. Our old RV started acting funny too. The lights would flicker, and the engine made sounds I'd never heard before. We found the tourists' burned RV about an hour later, near Eagle Rock. I've seen plenty of burned out vehicles in my time, but this was different. The metal wasn't just burned. It looked like candle wax that had melted and hardened again. And there was something else that made my stomach turn, huge claw marks in the ground, bigger than any bear could make. Emily walked around the site, her face getting paler by the minute. She stopped at one spot, and just stood there staring up at the sky. "They were so scared, Dad," she said, and I could see tears in her eyes. "I can feel it. They saw something big in the sky. We need to go see Uncle George, now." I wanted to tell her it was probably just some kind of accident. That's what the cop in me wanted to believe. But deep down, I knew better. Those old stories Uncle George told us about the Thunderbird, the ones I never really believed, kept playing in my head. As we drove to Uncle George's place, the strange clouds followed us, and I swear, just for a second, I saw something move inside them, something massive, with wings that seemed to stretch across the whole sky. Uncle George's small wooden house sat at the edge of the reservation, surrounded by sage plants and old prayer flags that fluttered in the strange wind. As soon as we pulled up, he was already standing on his porch, like he knew we were coming. That's the thing about Uncle George, who always seems to know things before they happen. "I've been waiting for you too," he said, his weathered face serious. He was wearing his old denim jacket with eagle feathers tied to it, the one he only wears for important ceremonies. "The signs are all here, just like the old stories warned us." Inside his house, the air smelled of burning sage and sweet grass. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor near the fireplace, while I took the old armchair. Uncle George didn't waste any time with small talk. "Last night, the eagles left their nests," he said, poking at the small fire. "All of them. They know what's coming. The great Thunderbird is awakening, and it's angry." I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. "Come on, Uncle George, those are just old stories." But he cut me off with a look that made me feel like a kid again. "Jack, your daughter has the gift. The same gift your mother had. Emily sees what's coming, don't you, child?" Emily nodded slowly, her hands trembling a little. "In my dreams I see it clearly now. It's huge, bigger than anything that flies. Its wings make thunder, and lightning comes from its eyes. But that's not the scariest part." She paused, looking at both of us. "It's looking for something we took from its sacred ground." Just then, the lights in Uncle George's house flickered and went out. Through the window, I saw those strange clouds getting darker, swirling in a way that wasn't natural. A deep rumble shook the house, but it wasn't thunder. It sounded more like a giant angry bird. Uncle George grabbed his sacred drum and some herbs from a shelf. "We don't have much time," he said urgently. "The tourists, they took something from the sacred cave. Something that's been guarding the Thunderbird's sleep for generations. We need to find it and put it back, or what's coming will be worse than anything you can imagine." Emily's eyes went wide. "The necklace," she whispered. "In my dream I saw a necklace with a blue stone that glowed like lightning." Another rumble shook the house, closer this time. And in the distance we heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A screech that was too big, too loud to be any normal bird. That's when we heard someone knocking hard on Uncle George's door. It was Dr. Rachel Foster, the scientist who'd been studying strange events in our area. She was soaking wet from the weird weather and looked scared. Something I'd never seen in her before. "You need to see this," she said, pulling out her tablet. Her hands were shaking as she showed us pictures from the tourist campground near Thunder Peak. Everything was destroyed. Tents ripped apart, cars flipped over, and deep claw marks everywhere. But what really got me was the strange burn marks in perfect circles, like giant footprints made of lightning. Emily moved closer to look at the pictures, and suddenly grabbed her head like she was in pain. "They're here," she whispered. "All of them, not just one Thunderbird. There's a whole family of them." Uncle George started gathering things quickly. "His sacred pipe, some special herbs, and an old leather bag I'd never seen before. The tourists broke an ancient promise," he explained. "Our ancestors made a deal with the Thunderbirds long ago. We would protect their sleeping place, and they would protect our lands. But now, another screech filled the air, closer this time. The windows rattled, and my phone sparked and died in my pocket. Dr. Foster's equipment went crazy, beeping and showing readings that made her face go white. The electromagnetic readings are off the charts," she said. "Whatever this is, it's generating more power than a dozen lightning storms." I was about to suggest we all get somewhere safe when Emily walked to the window. The sky had turned an awful greenish-black color, and the clouds were spinning like a tornado, but without any wind. "We can't hide," Emily said, sounding different, older somehow. "They'll find us anyway. We have to go to the sacred cave. That's where it all started, and that's where it has to end." Uncle George nodded slowly. "The girl is right, but we must hurry." When the sun sets, he didn't finish because right then, something huge passed over the house. The shadow was so big it turned everything dark for several seconds. Through the ceiling, we could hear the sound of giant wings, like leather tarps flapping in a storm. We all looked at each other, knowing we had no choice. We had to go to the cave, even though every part of me was screaming to grab Emily and drive as far away as possible. As we headed for my RV, I saw something that made me freeze. There, in the swirling clouds above us, was a pair of eyes, huge eyes that glowed like blue lightning, and they were looking right at us. Getting to the sacred cave wasn't going to be easy. The roads were a mess, trees knocked down everywhere, and weird lightning striking around us. I drove our RV as carefully as I could, while Uncle George sat in the back, softly chanting prayers. Dr. Foster kept checking her equipment, which was going crazier by the minute. Emily sat next to me, her eyes closed, like she was listening to something none of us could hear. "They're following us," she said quietly. "But they're not trying to stop us. They're waiting for something." The RV's engine started making funny noises, and the dashboard lights kept flashing on and off. Static electricity made everyone's hair stand up, and I could feel tiny shocks every time I touched the steering wheel. "Turn left here," Emily suddenly said, pointing to an old dirt road I'd never noticed before. I didn't question her mind. Now, I knew better. The road led us to the base of Thunder Peak, where the sacred cave was hidden. But as we got closer, we saw something that made us all gasp. The entire mountainside was covered in birds, thousands of them. Eagles, hawks, ravens, all just sitting there completely still like they were waiting. "Look," Dr. Foster pointed at her tablet. "The electromagnetic readings are centered right there in the cave entrance." Just then, our RV died completely. No choice but to walk the rest of the way. As we stepped outside, the air felt thick and heavy, like before the worst storm you can imagine. Uncle George took out something from his leather bag. An old necklace with a stone that looked just like the one Emily had described from her dreams. "This is the twin," he said. "There were always two necklaces. One to keep the Thunderbirds asleep, and one to wake them if we ever needed their help." The tourist took the sleeping stone. Another earth-shaking screech filled the air. This time we all looked up. Through gaps in the clouds we could see them massive shapes moving against the sky with wingspans wider than football fields. The Thunderbirds were circling above us, getting closer and closer. Emily reached for the necklace in Uncle George's hand. As soon as she touched it, the stone began to glow with a bright blue light. All the birds on the mountainside suddenly turned to look at her. "I know what we have to do," she said, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "But Dad, you're not going to like it." The biggest Thunderbird let out another screech, and this time, lightning struck in a circle around us, trapping us in a ring of burning ground. Emily was right. I didn't like her plan at all. She wanted to enter the cave alone, saying she was the only one who could make things right. My heart nearly stopped when she told me. But the look in her eyes, it was the same determined look her mother used to have. "The Thunderbirds won't hurt me," she said, squeezing my hand. "They've been talking to me in my dreams. They're angry, but they're also scared. Someone needs to show them we can be trusted again." Before I could argue, the ground shook violently. The largest Thunderbird landed on a cliff above us, and for the first time I saw it clearly. It was like looking at a storm that had taken the shape of a bird, dark swirling clouds for feathers, eyes glowing like blue lightning, and claws that sparked when they touched the rock. Dr. Foster's equipment suddenly burst into flames. "This is impossible," she whispered, backing away. "The energy readings, it's like having 10 power plants in one spot." Uncle George started his ceremony, beating his drum in a rhythm that somehow matched the thunder above. The smaller birds, the eagles and ravens, began making sounds too, like they were joining in. Emily took a deep breath and stepped toward the cave. I tried to follow, but a wall of lightning struck the ground between us. The message was clear. She had to do this alone. "I'll be okay, Dad," she called back to me. Just like Mom always said, sometimes the bravest thing is to trust. We watched as my 15-year-old daughter walked into the dark cave, the glowing necklace lighting her way. The great Thunderbird above us spread its wings, and the sky turned into a light show like nothing I'd ever seen. Minutes felt like hours. Uncle George kept drumming, Dr. Foster kept praying in her own scientific way, and I just stood there feeling more helpless than I ever had in my life. Then we heard Emily's voice from deep inside the cave. But it wasn't just her voice, it was like 100 voices speaking together, some human, some definitely not. The ground started shaking again. and the air filled with so much electricity that blue sparks danced between our fingers. Suddenly, a bright blue light exploded from the cave entrance. It was so bright we all had to cover our eyes. When I could see again, my heart stopped. Emily was floating in the air, right at the cave's mouth. Both necklaces were around her neck, glowing like mini suns. She found it, Uncle George said softly. The tourists left it deep in the cave, but something was wrong. Emily's face looked scared, and her voice shook when she shouted, "Dad, they're so angry. I can't control them all." The giant Thunderbird let out a screech that shattered rocks around us. More Thunderbirds appeared, their wings creating winds strong enough to knock us down. Lightning was striking everywhere, and the air felt like it was on fire. Dr. Foster grabbed my arm. "Look at the patterns," she yelled. Over the noise, the lightning, it's not random. They're creating some kind of circle. She was right. The lightning strikes were making a huge circle around the mountain, getting closer and closer to where we stood. Uncle George's drumming got faster, and he started singing an ancient prayer I remembered from my childhood. That's when Emily screamed. Not in pain, but like she was calling something. All the birds on the mountain, thousands of them, suddenly took flight at once. They started flying in a circle around Emily, moving so fast they looked like a tornado of feathers. The largest Thunderbird landed right in front of Emily. It was so huge, its head alone was bigger than our RV. It looked at her with those lightning eyes. And then, it bowed its head. Emily reached out and touched its beak. A shock wave of blue energy burst out from where they connected, knocking us all to the ground. When I looked up, Emily was speaking, but not in her normal voice. She was speaking in ancient Lakota, words I didn't even know she knew. The balance, Uncle George translated. His voice filled with awe. She's restoring the ancient balance. What happened next is something I'll never forget. Emily, my little girl, was speaking to these ancient creatures like she'd known them all her life. The big Thunderbird made a soft rumbling sound, almost like a purr, but as loud as thunder. "They understand now," Emily said, her voice sounding tired but happy. "They know we didn't mean to break the promise, but things have to change." The necklaces around her neck started glowing brighter. Emily slowly floated back down to the ground, and I ran to catch her. She felt so light in my arms, like she might blow away in the wind. "The Thunderbirds will stay," she explained, "but hidden. They'll protect our lands from above the clouds where people can't see them." "But Dad," she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I have to help them. I'm their new guardian." Dr. Foster was frantically taking pictures and notes. "This is incredible. The electromagnetic fields are actually stabilizing. They're creating some kind of natural barrier around the reservation." Uncle George nodded wisely. "Just like in the old days. The Thunderbirds and our people working together again." The giant Thunderbird spread its massive wings and lifted off, creating winds that nearly knocked us over. One by one, the others followed, disappearing into the clouds. But now, instead of angry storm clouds, they looked peaceful, like normal rain clouds watching over our lands. Emily hugged me tight. "Don't worry, Dad. I won't have to leave or anything. I just have to keep the balance." Like Mom would have wanted, the smaller birds, the eagles and ravens, started returning to their nests. The air felt clean and fresh, like after a good rain. Dr. Foster's equipment finally stopped smoking and started working normally again. But something had changed forever. Looking at Emily, I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just my little girl anymore. She was something more, a bridge between our world and theirs, between the old ways and the new. As we walked back to our RV, the sun finally broke through the clouds, and if you looked carefully, you could see something moving up there protecting us all. That was 5 years ago now. Life on the reservation has changed, but in good ways. The strange tourist disappearances stopped completely. Every now and then, during big storms, people say they see huge shadows in the clouds, but nobody's scared anymore. They know we're being watched over. Emily's grown into her role beautifully. She's 20 now and works with Uncle George, teaching the younger kids about our traditions. Sometimes late at night, I see her sitting outside, wearing those two ancient necklaces, talking to the sky. The stones still glow softly when she wears them, like they're happy to be with her. Dr. Foster stayed too. She set up a small research center near our house, but she's different now. She doesn't try to explain everything with science anymore. Some things, she says, are better left as mysteries. As for me, well, I'm still the tribal police officer, but my job's easier these days. It's funny. Whenever there's trouble brewing, a sudden storm appears out of nowhere, steering troublemakers away from our lands. Emily just smiles when I mention it. Last week, during a big thunderstorm, I saw something that made me smile. A group of kids was playing outside, and when thunder boomed overhead, instead of being scared, they all waved at the sky and shouted, "Hi Thunder friends." Up in the clouds, I swear I saw a flash of those giant wings, and heard what sounded like a friendly rumble in return. Emily says the Thunderbirds are happy now. They have their sacred place, we have our protectors, and the balance is restored. Sometimes the old stories are more than just stories, they're reminders of promises we need to keep. Now whenever I hear thunder, I think of my brave daughter and our incredible adventure. And I know that somewhere up there, watching over all of us, are the ancient guardians of our land, no longer angry, but at peace. My name is Bill Harrison, and I wish I had listened to the warnings. What happened in the boundary waters of Minnesota still haunts me every night. I'm writing this down now not just as a warning to others, but because I need to make sense of everything that changed my family forever. It all started last autumn when I decided to take my wife Patricia and our 12-year-old son Tommy on what was supposed to be a simple photography trip. As a wildlife photographer, I'd been to many remote places, but nothing could have prepared me for this. We packed our 1961 Winnebago Brave Might Out-trusted old RV that had taken us on countless family adventures before. Tommy was so excited, bouncing around as he helped load our supplies. Patricia, always the organized one, double-checked our emergency kits and winter gear. The weather report had mentioned some snow, but nothing serious. "Dad, can I bring my new binoculars?" Tommy asked, his eyes shining with excitement. "Of course, buddy," I replied, ruffling his hair. "You might spot something I miss with my camera." The first few hours of our drive north were perfect. The trees were showing their fall colors, reds and golds, against the gray sky. But as we got deeper into Minnesota's wilderness, things started feeling different. The sky turned darker than it should have been for early afternoon, and the wind picked up, making our RV sway on the empty road. That's when Tommy noticed something strange. "Dad, look at those trees," he called out from the back window. I couldn't stop then, but I saw them in my rearview mirror, weird symbols carved into the bark like nothing I'd seen before. Patricia said they looked like warnings, but I brushed it off as old trail markers. The radio started acting weird too. One minute it was playing normal music, then it would cut to static, and through that static, I swear we could hear chanting. Not in English, but in some language that made Tommy's face go pale. "Bill, maybe we should turn back," Patricia suggested, her hand gripping the dashboard as our headlights cut through the thickening fog. "The weather's getting worse." I should have listened to her. God, I should have listened. But I was so focused on getting those perfect autumn wildlife shots that I kept driving. How could I have known that every mile was taking us deeper into a nightmare that would test not just our survival skills, but our very souls? The shadows between the trees seemed to move, following our RV. Obsessed when sol fested wedio mirwi. At first I told myself it was just branches swaying in the wind. But deep down I knew we were being watched. Something out there had noticed us entering its territory, and it was already too late to turn back. As the weather got worse, I decided to stop at Miller's Trading Post, the last store for miles around. The wooden building looked old but welcoming, with its glowing windows fighting against the early darkness. Inside, the warmth from a pot-bellied stove made us all sigh with relief. "You folks might want to turn back," said the store owner Mike, as he rang up our supplies. "Storm's coming in faster than expected." He kept glancing at the windows like he was watching for something. That's when I first met old Joseph Running Bear. He appeared so quietly that we all jumped when he spoke. He was a tall, thin man with deep wrinkles and eyes that seemed to look right through you. He wore a worn jacket with traditional Ojibwe beadwork and a necklace made of what looked like animal teeth. "Your palm," he said to me suddenly, his voice quiet but firm. "Show me your palm." I thought it was strange, but something in his voice made me hold out my right hand. The old man's face was pale as he looked at it. "There is a death mark here," he whispered. "You are taking your family into forbidden territory." Tommy moved closer to Patricia, but I could see he was more curious than scared. Old Joseph noticed him too, and reached into a leather pouch at his belt. "Young one," he called to Tommy, "come here." Tommy looked at me, and I nodded. Old Joseph pressed something into Tommy's hand, a small wooden amulet on a leather cord. "Keep this close," he said. "It will protect you when the hunger walks." Patricia tried to pay him for the amulet, but he shook his head. "Some things cannot be bought," he said. "Some warnings must be given freely." As we walked back to our RV, I noticed something odd. The parking lot was full of pickup trucks, but there were no birds anywhere. No ravens on the power lines, no sparrows in the bushes. The woods were completely silent. "Bill," Patricia grabbed my arm, pointing to a bulletin board near the door. It was covered with missing person posters, all from the area we were heading to. Some were yellowed with age, others looked new. "Just hunters who got lost," I said, but my voice didn't sound as confident. "It happens every year." Back in the RV, Tommy sat quietly looking at his new amulet while Patricia made hot chocolate. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but old Joseph's words kept echoing in my mind. What did he mean by "when the hunger walks"? The snow started falling harder, and the daylight was fading fast. We needed to find a place to camp for the night, but every mile we drove felt like we were going deeper into something we didn't understand. Something that was waiting for us. We found a spot to park our RV near a frozen lake just as the sun was setting. The snow had stopped, but the air was getting colder by the minute. Much colder than it should have been for autumn. "I'll get some firewood," I said, zipping up my jacket. "Tommy, help your mom set up inside." I hadn't gone far when I found something that made my blood run cold. There, in a small clearing, was a deer, or what was left of it. The strange thing wasn't that it was half-eaten. We'd seen wolf kills before. What scared me was that the remaining parts were frozen solid, like they'd been in a deep freezer. But it was fresh. I could tell. When I got back to the RV, I didn't mention the deer. No need to scare them, but Tommy was acting strange, holding his amulet tight and staring out the window. "Dad," he whispered, "someone's calling my name." We all went quiet. At first I heard nothing but the wind. Then, they sounded like people calling for help, but something was off about them. The voices seemed to move around our RV, getting closer, then farther away. "That's impossible," Patricia said, her hand gripping mine. "We're miles from anyone." The temperature inside the RV started dropping, even though our heater was running full blast. We could see our breath in the air. Tommy's amulet, which had been hanging around his neck, suddenly felt warm to the touch. He said it was like holding a cup of hot chocolate. "Maybe we should go back," Patricia suggested, and this time I was starting to agree. But when I tried to start the RV, the engine wouldn't turn over. We were stuck. That's when we heard it, a sound that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite animal. Like someone trying to copy a person's voice, but getting it wrong, and footsteps in the snow, circling our RV, heavy footsteps. Tommy's amulet grew warmer, and he pointed to the window. "Look." Through the frosted glass, we saw a shadow pass by. It was tall, too tall to be human, and it was walking on two legs. "Nobody open the doors," I whispered, reaching for my hunting rifle. "Nobody look outside." But we all knew that whatever was out there had already found us, and somehow I had a feeling that my rifle wouldn't do much good against it. The longest night of our lives was just beginning, and we had no idea that what waited outside was only the start of our nightmare. The night seemed to go on forever. None of us could sleep. Around midnight, I decided I had to check my camera traps I'd set up earlier. They might show what was stalking us. "I'll be quick," I told Patricia, who begged me not to go. "Just 15 minutes. "Dad, please don't," Tommy said, clutching his amulet. "It's waiting for someone to come out." But I was stubborn. With my flashlight in one hand and rifle in the other, I stepped into the freezing night. The cold hit me like a wall. It must have been 30 below zero. My breath froze in the air. I found my first camera, but when I checked it, the batteries were dead. Weird, since I'd just put in new ones. The second camera was the same. But the third one had pictures. Looking at them made my hands shake. The first few shots showed nothing but trees. Then there was something in the background. A shape that shouldn't exist. It was like a person, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with arms that reached almost to the ground, and its face. I never made it back to the RV that night. The last thing I remember was hearing footsteps behind me, and a smell like rotting meat. When I turned around, I saw it. Really saw it. After that, everything went dark. Patricia told me later that I was missing for 6 hours. When I finally came back, I wasn't the same. I was hungry, so hungry, and the food in our RV didn't seem appetizing anymore. I wanted something else, something raw. "Bill, your fingers." Patricia gasped when she saw my hands. My fingers had grown longer, and my nails were turning black. I could feel something changing inside me, like my body was trying to become something else. Tommy kept his distance, holding his amulet. It was glowing now, giving off a faint blue light. When I tried to get closer to him, it burned brighter, and I had to step back. "Dad," he said, crying, "you're turning into one of them. Just like in old Joseph's stories." I caught my reflection in the RV's mirror. My eyes had changed. They were yellowish now, with pupils like a cat's, and my teeth, they were getting sharper. Patricia tried to start the RV again, but it was no use. We were trapped in a supernatural ice that had formed around the wheels. And outside I could hear them, of them, they were coming. That's when we heard a knock on the door. A familiar voice called out, "Let me in. I can help." It was old Joseph. But could we trust anyone, anything, in this nightmare? Patricia looked through the window first to make sure it was really old Joseph. He stood there in the snow, carrying a leather bag and what looked like bundles of herbs. Tommy's amulet glowed softly, not bright like it did when I got near, so we knew it was safe. "The change has begun," old Joseph said as soon as he entered. He looked at me with sad eyes. "But there's still time, just barely." I was huddled in the corner of the RV, trying to fight the horrible hunger inside me. Every time I looked at my family, a voice in my head whispered terrible things. I dug my now longer fingers into my arms, trying to stay in control. "What's happening to my dad?" Tommy asked, his voice shaking. Old Joseph began taking things out of his bag, candles, colored powders, and something that smelled like sage. "The wendigo," he explained, "is an ancient evil, a spirit of hunger that turns men into monsters. But your father is fighting it. That gives us a chance." He turned to Patricia. "You must perform the ritual. A wife's love is stronger than the wendigo's hunger, but it's dangerous. The spirit will try to stop you." Outside, the sounds grew closer. Through the frosted windows we could see dark shapes moving between the trees. They were tall, skeletal things that walked like people but weren't people anymore. "They're coming," I gasped, feeling the hunger get stronger. "I can hear them in my head. They're calling me to join them." Old Joseph worked fast, drawing a circle on the RV floor with colored powder. He gave Patricia a small drum and taught her words in his language. Tommy stood guard with his amulet, which now shone like a small blue sun. "Whatever happens," old Joseph warned, "don't break the circle, and don't listen to anything they say, even if they sound like someone you know." Just then, something hit the RV hard enough to rock it. The windows frosted over completely, and the temperature dropped so low our words came out as white puffs. "They're here," Tommy whispered. Patricia started beating the drum, her hands shaking but her voice strong as she repeated the words old Joseph taught her. The real test was about to begin, and none of us knew if we would survive the night. As Patricia beat the drum, the RV filled with a strange blue light, the same color as Tommy's amulet. Old Joseph started burning sage, and its sweet smoke made my head clearer for a moment. But the hunger, that terrible hunger, was still growing. "Keep going," Old Joseph told Patricia. "The spirit world is opening." The walls of the RV seemed to fade away, like we were sitting in the middle of the snowy forest. But this forest wasn't normal. The trees were black and the snow glowed with a pale light. I could see them clearly now, the wendigos. They were everywhere, watching us with their glowing yellow eyes. "Bill," Patricia called to me, her voice strong but scared. "Focus on my voice. Remember who you are. Remember our family." I tried. God, how I tried. But the changes were getting worse. My skin felt like it was stretching, and my teeth were so sharp they cut my tongue. The hunger was like a fire in my stomach. That's when the wendigos attacked. They slammed against Tommy's amulet's light, which had created a shield around us. Their screams sounded like winter wind mixed with human cries. They called to me in voices I recognized. My parents, my friends, even Patricia and Tommy's voices. "Don't listen," Old Joseph shouted. "They're trying to trick you." Tommy stood brave, holding his amulet high, even though he was shaking. "Dad," he cried, "you have to fight it. Remember when you taught me to fish? Remember our camping trips?" Memories flashed in my mind. Tommy's first bike ride, Patricia's smile on our wedding day, family dinners, and lazy Sunday mornings. But the wendigo spirit fought back, showing me images of hunting, of running free in the snow, of feeding. Patricia's drum beat grew louder, and Old Joseph's chanting became urgent. The wendigos pressed closer, their long fingers scratching at our protective circle. I could feel myself slipping away, becoming one of them. Then Patricia did something that changed everything. She stepped toward me, still beating the drum, still chanting, with tears freezing on her cheeks. "Choose us," she whispered. "Choose love over hunger." In that moment, everything came down to one choice. The wendigo spirit was pulling me one way, but my family's love was pulling me another. I looked at Patricia's tear-filled eyes, at Tommy's brave face as he held up the glowing amulet, and I knew what I had to do. "I choose them," I growled. "Fighting against the hunger, they're my family. You can't have me." The largest wendigo, their leader, let out a terrible scream. The RV windows shattered, letting in the freezing wind. But I stayed focused on Patricia's drumbeat, on Tommy's amulet light, on Old Joseph's chanting. Then something incredible happened. Tommy's amulet shot out a bright blue beam, hitting the leader wendigo. It shrieked, but couldn't move away. The other wendigos backed off, hissing like angry cats. "Now," Old Joseph shouted to Patricia, "finish the ritual." Patricia's drum beat faster, and she sang louder. I felt the changes in my body starting to reverse, my fingers shortening, my teeth returning to normal. But the hunger was still there, fighting back. The leader wendigo spoke then, in a voice like cracking ice. "If we can't have him, we'll take the boy instead." It reached for Tommy with its long, bony arms. Without thinking, I jumped between them. "You won't touch my son." The moment I touched the wendigo, something strange happened. Its ice-cold body started freezing me, but Tommy's amulet light wrapped around both of us. I held on to the creature, even as frost covered my skin. "Dad, no," Tommy screamed. "Keep going." I yelled to Patricia, "Finish it. I love you both." Patricia hit the drum one final time, and everything exploded in blue light. When the blue light faded, I was lying on the RV floor. The windows were whole again, and the terrible cold was gone. Patricia and Tommy rushed to me, both crying and hugging me tight. "You're warm," Tommy said, touching my face. "You're you again, Dad." Old Joseph checked my palm. The death mark was gone, but his face was serious. "The wendigo is trapped," he said, pointing to Tommy's amulet, which now had a dark swirl inside it, like smoke frozen in ice. He was right. I felt different. The hunger was gone, but so was something else. I couldn't feel the cold anymore, and when I looked in the mirror, my eyes had a tiny bit of blue in them, like the amulet's light. "Part of you will always be connected to this place now," Old Joseph explained. "You gave up a piece of your soul to save your family. The amulet holds both your sacrifice and the wendigo's spirit." Patricia started the RVE. It worked this time. As we drove away, I saw the other wendigos retreating deep into the forest. They wouldn't bother anyone for a while, not with their leader trapped. That was 2 months ago. We're home now, trying to live normally again. Tommy keeps the amulet safe, and sometimes at night, it glows softly. Patricia says she can still hear the drum beats in her dreams. Me? I'm mostly okay, but different. I can sense when bad things are coming now, especially in winter. I can't take pictures anymore. Cameras stop working around me, and sometimes, when the moon is full and the night is cold, I hear distant voices calling. But I just hold my family closer and remember what I chose that night. Old Joseph visits sometimes. He says Tommy has a gift now, a responsibility to protect others from what lives in those woods. The amulet will pass down through our family, guarding its secret. We never went back to the Boundary Waters, but I know the wendigos are still there, waiting. So if you're ever driving through northern Minnesota and see strange symbols on the trees, or hear voices calling your name in the snow, turn around, go home. Some hunting grounds aren't meant for humans, and if you feel a sudden hunger on a cold night, remember my story. Remember that love is stronger than any curse, any hunger. It saved me. But not everyone gets a second chance.